Appreciate it being here. You were just in Phoenix this last weekend or so, or coming up on Phoenix.
Phoenix, I leave tomorrow
Okay.
for Mises Institute.
Yep. We just had Tom DiLorenzo on the show last week, and you and him. I forgot who the third speaker is, but you guys are part of a powerful trio of speakers coming up this weekend.
Well, Mises is always a powerful place, and I'm glad to be there. You know, this is the if there's a center in the world of libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism, Mises is it. And what's fascinating, I mean, there's news that just broke with President Trump's various statements yesterday and declarations. He's forcing academe to change their terms and conditions for accreditation. Now, that may seem a little bit inside baseball, but it makes a big difference for Mises. Mises has not done the paperwork to become an accredited academic institution. So they can't formally take students that get student loans and federal aid because they would not go through with the DEI paperwork that was required. And now President Trump has basically made all of those DEI qualifications for becoming an accredited academic institution moot. He's declared that they're not allowed to do that anymore. So I suspect that Mises may now join the ranks of formally authorized academic institutions, which would be great.
But again, it's something where you have this window of 3.5 years now of President Trump's under this order, right? If it's not, if it doesn't get
True.
legislated, we could go back the other way one day. So the challenge of the next 4 years.
Absolutely. But I got to say, as I look out over the horizon of what's going on, I'm stunned by what President Trump is doing. It's just event after event after event, position after position after position. And it's left the left reeling a little bit. But the other thing that strikes me, the more I learn, the more amazed I am at how deeply corrupt DC had become under Biden and McConnell and Pelosi.
Yeah. I always said when President Trump was elected the first time, he was the spiritual love child of Nancy Pelosi, Paul Ryan, John Boehner, Mitch McConnell, both parties all together. This is what they presented.
That's what they give rise to. Yeah, that's kind of the blowback, using a intelligence term. They all their conniving led to empowering Donald Trump. The other big news is, I don't know if you caught it, Pete Hegseth's statement yesterday, in which he is acknowledging that the DoD mandated illegally a experimental vaccine product. That is a bomb.
Yeah.
That talk about a truth bomb. That is amazing because that has all kinds of implications. And that was one of the things that I originally got hit by the Washington Post fact checker on when I said that so long ago, that these were not authorized. They were not fully authorized by the FDA. These were still experimental products. And, there was all kinds of hubbubaloo and basically accusations that I was misstating truth. But now we have Hegseth coming out and saying it right in your face. And that means that the mandates, think about it, just take a moment. The mandates were for an experimental vaccine, a new technology untested that had side effects that include severe disease, damage, and death. And they were mandated illegally on people without providing informed consent. And we now have the Secretary of Defense stating that's the case. The question I have now is, are there going to be any court martials? Are there going to be any consequences? This was brought to my attention by a captain level JAG from the Navy that I had worked with and helped back in the day. Met her in Honolulu and then in Maui, and gave some depositions together with Pierre Corey and others. She has got a binder that tracks these illegal orders all the way through. She knows exactly who said what and when in the DOD to authorize this. The chain all started basically with a colonel who was about to be retired, being told to give out the order. And so he gave the order. The up above him, the statements were made in a kind of a wishy-washy way so that people couldn't be held accountable. But then he gave the order, and then that passed down, and then he immediately retired. So it was a real sleight of hand that the DoD used to implement this. But there has to be accountability now, and of course Hegseth is trying to get all of those DoD personnel that left based on conscientious objection to this reinstated. Another thing that hasn't really been reported that I heard again and again and again was the uh, death due to cardiac events of special forces, particularly special forces in training. And the little game that was played by DOD, because they have to do autopsies when there is a death like that, an unexplained death. And so they would do these autopsies, and then they would never release the results, because if the results were released, then it would trigger um, the release not only of this key information that would have blown open the narrative, but also it would trigger the death benefits for the survivor spouse or partner. And so basically, the partners of these guys mostly that died after the jab that were high performance athletes, among some of the ones that are at highest risk. Uh, their spouses or significant others, they're were never able to get the death benefits because the DoD hid the autopsy results because they were inconvenient. All
Wow.
of that's got to come out now.
The I was watching the interview with Tucker with Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong. I don't know if you.
Yes. Yep.
And to me, that's one of, since you're, all the stuff that you blew out with Joe on the Rogan interview, to me, this is like part two, right? What Patrick came up with, talking about high levels of cervical cancer in kids and all of these.
Yeah, that's been brewing for a long time now. Oncologists have been observing that. And he made a series of statements that had not been said quite so clearly or prominently before, but are absolutely valid and have been discussed at length among those of us within the community, and are generally accepted knowledge in oncology. For instance, his key thesis is that cancer is a disease of immune surveillance failure,
Right.
and that cellular immunity is more important than antibody based immunity, and that the whole vaccine industry has just become enthralled with antibodies. What he didn't say was part of the reason for that is because measurement of cellular immunity is hard and measurement of antibodies is easy.
Right.
And so they default to the easy technology, and then they go chasing that because it's a parameter that they can optimize. But what he was saying about the importance of cellular immunity, the conversion of neutrophils and T cells to suppressor phenotypes, that's all been known for quite a long time. What he coyly alluded to was this vaccine, quote unquote, that he has that will augment that cellular immunity, but he never really gets around to telling us what it is that he's got up his sleeve.
Right.
In a way, it was a little bit of, as I said, it was kind of a sleight of hand. I was a little disappointed in that part of the interview. Is it, to my frame of reference, kind of being an insider in this, what he said in a very clear way with authority, in very concisely, was he laid out the case that cellular immunity is super important. The T regulatory cells and suppressor cells are super important. The chronic inflammation will trigger the switch towards suppressor phenotype from the active phenotype, and that underlies a lot of the uh, let's say post-vaccination syndrome, and also the consequences of the primary infection. And then he talks about his new product in a general sense, but he never gets around to really giving us any material information about the nature of what it is that he says he has. And that bothered me a little bit.
It was something where, to me, here's Patrick, who is a real deal guy, and in relation to what he's developed over the years in this sphere, and he
Yep.
said he really comes out and talks about in the first 10 minutes of the interview that cancer is blowing up in areas they've never seen before since the COVID-19 vaxes, right? And no one in the other quote media has any intellectual curiosity or is not allowed to talk to Patrick other than Tucker Carlson. I mean, that's kind of big news.
Well, the other big news was he put out in detail how he had attempted to, um, what's the right word, interface with, inform, brief a lot of the establishment within the government about his concerns regarding this and his observations, Tony Fauci and others.
Right.
And he basically got the cold shoulder. He got stonewalled. And what all this reveals is the intrinsic, the kindest way is to say bias. What the implication is that there was something more nefarious going on that caused these guys, and they're largely guys, to have this unwillingness to consider alternative hypotheses. But that has been the history of AIDS vaccine development, by the way. I mean, what he's touching on in many ways is an extension of the culture that is built around the AIDS vaccine enterprise, which has been the huge failure of Anthony Fauci's entire career. It was what launched his career. And it was the specific mission that the Vaccine Research Center was built for at NIH. And it has been an abysmal failure and just absolutely torn by internecine warfare and this kind of sniping, circular firing squad stuff that goes on in academia, where you have these cliques that become so invested in one solution or another they won't listen to anything else. They won't listen to other scientists. They won't listen to other data. And that's exactly what was being recapitulated again in the context of his observations with COVID. The turbo cancer uh, storyline has been out there for a long time and it's been actively suppressed. It's still actively suppressed. And people like Ryan Cole have been early advocates for that and have lost their licenses, been damaged in so many ways. Ryan has had to sell his pathology company that was providing pathology specialty services all over the United States because he could no longer get reimbursement because of talking about things like turbo cancer. And there's still got to be, just like I'm talking about with Pete Hegseth in the military, there has to be some accountability here for what was done. And I think that that really needs to start with Tony Fauci. And I hear rumor from my insider DC colleagues that there is an active FBI investigation ongoing about Tony Fauci. And Tony has decamped. Not everybody's aware of this. I learned about it when I traveled to Italy, to Rome, a couple of weeks ago. Fauci has decamped to Italy. That's where he's hanging out in Siena, working with GSK and BioNTech, who have big R&D and manufacturing plants. This isn't Tuscany. It's about as pretty as you're going to get.
Yep.
And that's where he's living now, living the good life. And there were these recent reveals that his family net worth has just exploded after he left the government, something like a $14 million bump or something. This just something isn't adding up here.
The idea that that bastard's in Siena, Italy, while he's working with more pharmaceutical companies is just, it's wild. It's just perfect for that guy.
Apparently, he was started working with them very actively, I'm told, by whistleblowers in Italy in about 2022. So while he was still a government employee.
Wow. What? So what are we seeing? I want to get to RFK and dies and things like that, but what
Yep.
what what needs to happen before I get there on in relation to any sort of COVID-19 justice for America and people's lives who were damaged? We have a family member who died last year of unknown reasons, but her neurologist said, you know something, and there was nothing that we can tell there was nothing wrong with her, right? No blood pressure, no cancer, no, we can go through the whole thing. And he goes, you know, those two Moderna shots are looking at right now are staring a hole right through my head right now. And so we've had our lives touched by this in our family. Is there going to be any justice for America, the people that were damaged by taking this crap and getting forced and feared into it?
So thanks for bringing that up. And that's been a hot topic because I also experienced vaccine damage when I took Moderna jab number 2. I received one of the bad lots. And I had POTS syndrome. I'm still on, I think I just finally got off of beta blockers, but I've had all kinds of things, restless leg syndrome, etc. And fortunately, I didn't die or develop, at least to the best of my knowledge, severe myocarditis. I've had the tests, and my cardiac function seems to be pretty good, but my pressure and pulse have been all over the place, but they've normalized now. This is something that Donald Trump could do, is to uh, write another executive order directing the vaccine courts to aggressively pursue compensation for people who have received vaccine damage. Up until now, the federal vaccine courts have been basically packed um, and biased towards denying any claims. And these were set up to uh, provide compensation in order to protect vaccine manufacturers largely from going bankrupt by trial lawyers going after them. But I really, I want to be very careful what I say about Donald Trump, but one positive thing he could do would be to change the tone and emphasis and criteria for providing compensation to these people that have been vaccine injured. General vaccine injuries, as well as the specific ones relating to the genetic vaccines. Another thing that's happened now is with this kind of breaking dam narrative that these were not actually approved, that these were experimental products, they were imposed on people, is that the narrative that the government has established that these were fully authorized and all appropriately vetted uh, has broken apart now. And uh, the logical legal wall that has been built to protect the likes of Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna is crumbling. And the question is, if these are not really vaccines, because that's now being adjudicated in court, that's the claim that's being made. If these were not really vaccines and they weren't appropriately authorized under EUA, then suddenly that indemnification falls apart. And the question is, can the AG or other members of the Trump administration move forward and advance the legal theory that these manufacturers should be able to be held accountable? Because their position up till now has basically been that, yes, there was fraud, but we provided the fraud that the federal government contracted us to provide. And the courts have basically fallen in line with that. This has to do with the nuances of the contracting vehicle, the other transactional authority that
Right.
was used to award this. And that's another pressure point that the Trump administration could push on. Because if that one falls, then these manufacturers become liable and the court cases will have standing and people can move forward. So there's a number of things that I think that can be done that, Bobby used this curious turn of phrase the other day when he was talking about um, what will be done in order to force manufacturers to come into compliance with these various mandates that are coming down. And he referred to market forces uh, disciplining these companies. And I think that that was code for let the Trial Lawyers Association have its way with these companies. You know, let the lawsuits begin. That's if you want to translate market forces, it's Trial Lawyers Association, and it's also informing the consumer. And he just did that in a big way. This is my segue. That he just did that in a big way, having to do with these petroleum-based dyes.
Now hold on for 2 seconds. On one last thing on Fauci before we get to dyes is I want to see someone test his pre-pardon by Biden. Right, the idea that he's been pardoned for something that supposedly he says never happened. I want someone to
With
go on the test that
with
one.
auto pardoned by AutoPen, and that's way bigger than just Fauci, and that is out there. So I'm disclosing to you this inside the Beltway rumor that there is an ongoing FBI investigation of Anthony Fauci. That can't happen unless there is a presumption that that blanket pardon is not valid. And I think there is a legal standing here because it wasn't actually Joe Biden that signed those pardons. And it's not just going to be Anthony Fauci, it's going to be the whole crew that persecuted the J6 cases.
Yep.
It's going to just, that issue is going to really go big because of that use of the auto pen and the failure to document that those were really signed by President Biden, combined with the growing uh, tidal wave of information about Joe Biden's mental challenges
All
during
right.
his presidency.
Get you back to petrochemical dyes now. So Bobby came out and with this order basically that they haven't officially banned them, but they're getting on the road to ban them. Is that what I'm hearing? Did I read it right?
So, in the waning days of the Biden administration, the FDA suddenly, unexpectedly banned FD&C red dye number 3, which has been among the more notorious ones, but gave a timeline for compliance of 2027. Okay. And because we have to let industry have its way, right? Um, and what Marty McCarty has come out with, the commissioner of the FDA, with backing from Bobby Kennedy, in this really, I think it's the first time that the uh, PR press relations group within HHS hit, was running on all cylinders. This was the first press conference that Bobby ran that really went well. A couple ones before, he kind of stubbed his toe on various things like the autism issues. And of course, it was immediately attacked for that. But this time they knocked it out of the park. They had an angry mom. They had all kinds of backup. They had the audience filled with moms that for whom this is a hot topic, because the key issue here is not just the cancer risks, but the ADHD.
Right.
And that is well documented with these dyes. So what Marty said was a couple of key things. He's banning these dyes effective 2026. Okay, so he moved the timeline forward.
Yep.
Uh, and he is acting to authorize, I think it's 4 different natural product based dyes that can substitute for these petroleum based dyes that have these various problems. And then they are accelerating approval of other natural product based dyes. These are largely plant, like beet for red and carrot for yellow,
Right.
orange, etc.
Sounds,
So
sounds
that's that's what's going down. Is it's a lot of people are grumbling because it's not immediate, and then there's the whole base that continues to be pissed off because Bobby hasn't and Marty haven't unilaterally withdrawn the mRNA genetic vaccine products from the market. But right now there's not a broad-based consensus for that activity, and if he was to do that, um, then there would be huge blowback. He's got to build consensus within the general electorate. Right now, it's a minority opinion that these products need to be withdrawn. I said they should have been withdrawn, I think it was almost 3 years ago. I did a press conference with other physicians, but that remains a minority position. But at least they're doing something with these petroleum based additives. And Marty said that he was going to get all of these petroleum based additives out of the food stream. Right now, there are 10,000 FDA authorized compounds in our food, organic compounds. Organic doesn't mean organic like um, it was grown in a nice, pretty farm. Organic means it's based on petroleum.
Wow. The we we know that a lot of the people on the left will just take the opposite position because Trump supports it, no matter how reasonable it could be.
Yeah, there's a word in psychology. It's called oppositional defiant disorder. We can put that right next to Trump derangement syndrome.
Did you see the picture, Malta Joe? Do you have that picture? I put it back up. Have you seen the Babylon Bee with Liz Warren and AOC? Because they got
So I love, for instance, the Babylon Bee one the other day with the Pope lying in state, and it was a play on CNN talking about Joe Biden, and so they come up with good stuff. So let's see the clip.
it's just a picture of, because it's the idea that it's called Democrats begin chugging artificial food dyes to protest RFK. There it is.
Right, there's going to be a run on those little bottles of squirt dye. Um, Starbucks, I'm sure, is going to come out with a FD&C Red 3 mocha frappuccino or something.
On that juvenile note, Dr. Malone, I got to let you get on to the rest of your day. And we'll be pushing your event this Saturday in Phoenix, and we'll get some folks up there. And our friend Drew Heaton is one of our libertarian. She's the grand mistress of the Libertarian Party. She's sponsoring your visit. She's a
Oh,
listener and viewer of the show. So,
thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for having me on. And all hail to Mises. I think they're doing a fantastic job. They carry the torch in a world that doesn't want to hear the message. But I'm convinced, and Javier Milei is convinced, and increasingly Donald Trump is convinced, and so many others. So they continue to be validated on a daily basis. We'll see what happens to the Fed next.
all right, Dr. Malone, I always love talking to you, and hopefully we can do it again soon. All right, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me on.
All right.